Night steamed up from the marshes as if the neck itself were exhaling. A slow, damp breath that slicked the skin and made the world small. The frogs had gone quiet at the first whisper of oars, and the little skin boat slid along in a tunnel of rushes that brushed John's shoulders and spattered black water onto his boots. Lantern light ahead was a blurred wick through mist. It swung, dipped, and steadied, the Crannogmen's signal, then vanished as the poleman pressed the craft across a trickle of current where the reek of peat gave way to brine. Ned Stark sat opposite him, the wet gleam of the marsh on his hair and beard. He had wrapped his cloak tight and drawn the hood low, but even hooded, even with the lines of strain cut deeper into his face by sleepless nights and hard riding, John would have known him by the way he set his jaw. There was a steadiness in that jaw, the granite of an old cairn weathering the years. There was a weariness too, and a grief John did not understand.
Quiet, Ned murmured.
The word barely disturbed the wall of mist. John had never seen the neck like this. In his boyhood, it had been the southern gate of a world he could not rule, a smeared line on maps in the maester's books, a place for whispered tales of gray men and frog-eaters and a fortress that moved. Now it smelled of wet earth and old secrets. Ghost crouched at the prow, red eyes bright, pale fur beaded with dew. The albino's ears pricked at every rustle in the reeds. He made no sound. John's hand found the curve of his neck and stayed there until the boat scraped something soft and the poleman hissed under his breath. The lantern reappeared, closer, and through the vapor came a low causeway of black timbers bound with roots. Shapes stood on it, two slight figures with frog spears, a third squat and wider, shouldering a driftwood shield. They were wrapped in mud-streaked leather, faces netted in swamp light. When the poleman drove the skin boat into the cradle of the dock, the squat one stepped down without a creak. "Lord Eddard," he said in a voice that had the reeds in it. "Howland," Ned returned, and for a heartbeat the sternness broke. He reached out, their hands clasped, forearm to forearm. "Old friend." Howland Reed's eyes went to John and then to Ghost. "You brought the white shadow," he said. "He shines like moon ice. He will not vanish, never mind how thick the fog." John bowed awkwardly. He had been taught to show courtesy to lords and men. He had never learned what to do when a man who had saved your father's life wore mud as a badge and spoke gently as a priest. "Your people?" Ned asked. "Hidden," Reed said. "The water remembers. The men who hunt on the King's Road forget." They passed along the causeway to a low island of peat that squelched underfoot. Greywater Watch had drifted somewhere beyond the mire, as it always did. What stood here was a ring of woven huts and a fire so low it seemed buried. Reed ducked into one of the huts and pushed aside a hanging of rushes. The air inside was close, red from embers. The walls were a palisade of woven reeds hung with fish bones and deer teeth. A frog spear leaned in the corner beside two ash bows. There was a smell of smoke and herbs that tugged at the edge of memory. Maester Lewin, brewing willow tea after Bran had fallen. John's stomach clenched. "Eat," Howland Reed said simply. "Then we speak." They ate stew from wooden bowls and hard bread broken with fingers. The meat might have been eel or might have been the neck itself. John's hunger had no questions. When the bowls were empty, Ned took off his damp cloak and set it aside. His hands rested on his knees, scarred, steady. His eyes did not go to John. They went to the fire. "I should have told you years ago," he said. John had prepared himself for many words. Commands, reproaches, the soft lie that would send him back to the wall with a pat on the head and a bag of shame. He had not prepared himself for that sentence. The hut seemed to tilt, the reed walls bowing inward. Ghost shifted and pressed his flank against John's boot. Ned breathed once. "The North is called. Robb has raised the banners. Lannister riders scour the Trident and the King's Road. Caitlin." His mouth tightened. "I have failed you all, one by one, and have no time for the slow justice I know. So I will speak the truth quickly. You must hear me as you would hear the wind when a storm comes." Howland Reed made a sound in his throat, like a heron calling from the dark. "The storm has come," he said, "and it knows your name, John, son of mine." Ned said and shook his head. He looked at John then, the full weight of a father's gaze that had for years been withheld from the one who wanted it most, heavy not with disdain but with fear. You are my blood. You are not my son. The world rocked. John's bowl slid in the rushes. The old hurt flared and went quickly to ash, smothered by something colder. If this is another kindness that is a cruelty, he said, each word a purpose. I have had enough. Say what you mean or send me away and be done. Lyanna, Ned said softly. Her name was a knife that turned in the air and hovered between them. John had known it only as a name that made his Lord Father go quiet when the weirwood's red leaves charred in frost. He had known it as a taste at the back of his throat, bitter and unripe. He had known it as a rumor that would not die in the castle kitchens. She was my sister, Ned said, as if John might not know. She bled and bled in a tower of cursed stones while the world tore itself apart for the lie of a crown. I was there when she lay upon the bed and the blood would not stop, when she gripped my hand so tight my bones ground. She made me swear. The old gods in the heart tree at Winterfell had seen many oaths, many broken. John had heard the stories. He had not heard this one. The fire snapped as if it, too, had been waiting. I swore to protect her son, Ned said. To keep him from the knives the world sharpens for bastards and kings. I gave him my name. I brought him to my hall. I allowed my wife to bear the sting of it and gave him nothing but my silence, because silence was the wall that kept the boy's life safe. Howland Reed's spear-broad fingers toyed with a braid of rush. His eyes did not leave John's face. Say it, John said. His voice was a whisper stripped of softness. Say it plain. He was not my son, Ned said. He was hers. Rhaegar Targaryen's too. The rush mat shifted beneath John and went away. The floor dropped like ice under a wheel. His head filled with the roar of something that had no shape, only a heat and a wind. There were words he could say, no lie, cannot, that belonged to summer, to boyhood. He tasted iron. Ghost pressed against his knee, solid and warm, and here. I am no king's son, John said at last. I am a bastard. You are my blood, Ned said again, and the words were an anchor. That is all that has ever mattered to me, but others will not see it so. Robert is dead. The boy on the Iron Throne wears a crown forged from sins and secrets. Stannis speaks of law, Renly of smiles. Tywin speaks in gold. Each would use you and cast you aside, or kill you to be sure they cannot be used. The north is rising. The riverlands burn. If ever I could have shielded you with my name alone. He shut his eyes, and when he opened them his voice had gone to ground. I could not. I cannot. What do you want of me? John asked. He had wanted this. Truth from the man whose silence he had carried like a weight that warped his spine. Now the truth had soured the air. It tasted of smoke. Ned looked to Howland Reed. Illyrio's ship waits, he said. He is a magister in Pentos who deals in silk and secrets. I don't like the man, but Varys trusts him, and Varys has had a longer reach than most. The ship will drop anchor off Duskendale at the turn of the tide. If John boards before dawn, he will see the Titan of Bravos before the moon grows thin again. From there, he must vanish, change his name, sell his sword if he must, learn to fish, sweep floors for a Bravo. I do not care. He must live. Exile was not a word in the books of knighthood, but it had a feel. It was a shore that receded as you swam. John sat with it as one sits with a hurt that cannot be mended by a poultice and time. He thought of the wall and the brothers he had left in a midnight ride when his blood had boiled in him like melted snow. He thought of robbing himself of vows with the stroke of a spur and the bite of a winter wind, and of Jeor Mormont's steady eyes. He thought of Sansa, pretty as a summer day and somewhere in a nest of lions, and of Arya with her wild hair and needle heart. He thought of Robb's laugh and Bran's solemn wonder and Rickon's small hand in Ghost's tail fur. He thought of Catelyn's cool glance and felt shame, and then anger. He thought of the red leaves in Winterfell's godswood and the shredded bark that took his tears and gave nothing. I will not run, he said. You will live, Ned answered. What will you do? John asked back, and the lodged splinter in his ribs pressed deeper. Fight Tywin's war? Bend to Stannis? Leave Sansa in their claws? You taught me that a man's honor is a small blanket. Tug it to cover your shoulders and your feet grow cold. I will do what I must, Ned said, and the thinness in his voice cut more than anger would have. Robb needs a whisper more than a banner. The neck is my friend. Howland can hide a king's army in these reeds. He can hide my letters. Stannis will be king by law. Law will not be enough. I will be a ghost when a ghost is what the North needs. You would be a ghost to your son, Jon said. Ned flinched as if struck, but his eyes did not leave Jon's. I ask more than I have any right to ask, he said. It is not the honor you wanted. It is not the place in my hall you deserved. It is the only thing that keeps your heart beating. Howland Reed spoke, dry as reedgrass. Your dire wolf will make vanishing more difficult, he said. Ghost lifted his head. His pink tongue tasted the air. He huffed, as if amused by the notion that he could be unseen. He comes, Jon said. The thought of setting Ghost down on the peat and walking away without the drag of his shadow, without the soft touch of breath behind his knee, no. The word had weight too. If I am to live, he added, and the word felt like a treason. It will be with him. Reed's mouth twitched. Then the white shadow must learn to be quiet. He has always known, Jon said, and the sound Ghost made was almost laughter. They slept in the Crannogmen's hut as if the marsh itself could hold back the world. Ned did not sleep. He sat with a frog spear across his knees and watched his son sleep by the embers with a direwolf's head on his ankles, as if the beast were a chain binding him to earth. When the gray before dawn lifted the fog a finger's breadth, they went. The causeway unspooled toward a strip of firmer shore, and ponies waited there with chests like barrels and shaggy coats that turned the marsh water with disdain. They rode along sunken paths by the ghost of a road that might once have borne the feet of kings. The reeds hissed like plodding courtiers. Twice they halted while Howland's daughter Mira, slim and swift, went on ahead, and twice she returned to whisper of riders at distance. Once men in Lannister read upon the high ground, once grim knights in dark, plain harness riding hard for the south. The world was narrowing to a throat. The air pressed as if it were a hand. At dusk the neck gave way to woods that smelled of oak sap and old fires. Howland Reed led them to a stream and a lean-to roofed in boughs, and there they parted. Howland clasped Ned's arms and then Jon's, looking at the white wolf as if he were blessing and curse. Mira smiled at Jon. Jojen, the younger one with moss in his gaze, said nothing. His silence followed Jon like a prayer or a warning. Remember your mother, Howland Reed said at the last. And remember your father. Jon did not ask him which he meant. They rode the King's Road only in darkness, keeping to the verge when they could, turning out at the jingling of mail. Once, a patrol passed so close Jon could see the breath smoking through a youth's visor. Ghost's ears flattened. His flanks ribbed under Jon's hand as he stilled. The patrol went by with laughter, and the smell of them, grease, ale, horse, washed away into the cold. Duskendale crouched upon a break in the cliffs like a cat with its tail in the sea. The harbor was a hook of black water where a handful of cogs and galleys hunched under blank sails as if asleep. A light bobbed twice on the breakwater and once again. Ned answered with a shuttered lantern from under his cloak, and a boat whispered out from the shadow of a large, low vessel that had the look of Pentos. High forecastle, aft castle shallow and wide, hull painted in dark slathers of blue and black so that the waves made it vanish. The oarsmen wore scarves over their hair and silver hoops in their ears. The man in the stern had a belly that pushed at his sash and a beard slicked with oil. In the lantern's dip his skin shone like old gold. My masters, he said. A night for shadows? And shadows pay. Illyrio sends his kisses, as always. Kisses enough to smother, Ned said, but there was no fire in it. He stood with his feet set as if the docks might buck him off. This is the boy. The man in the boat raised a brow at Ghost. And his dog. You have a name? Jon asked. Caro Valentin. he said in a pride that turned the O into a jewel. Captain of the silken gale. Step lightly, sweet prince of. His eyes flicked to Ned, and something like a wink went through them. The north wind. John set his boot on the boat's gunwale, then bit down on the desire to look back. He turned anyway. He could not take it with him if he did not. Ned stood with his cloak open now, the wind lifting the edge of it. The hair at his temples had gone whiter in the last week. He had not touched John's shoulder. He did not now, he could not. They had never been good at it, the touching. Duty was a cloth that left little skin bare. Your words, John said, and his throat closed around them. He pushed on it with a will he had thought would always serve him. Your words were always winter. Winter teaches, Ned said. He looked down at Ghost as if the wolf held answers. I have not been a kind teacher. You kept me alive, John said. You do it again now. I hate it, Ned said. His voice was hardly a sound. I will write when I can. If you receive word with a frog carved above the seal, believe it. All else you must treat as poison. He reached into his cloak and drew out a worn leather purse fat with dragons. This will buy you names. Choose one that fits lightly. Wear it until it frays. John took the purse. He did not take the hand. Am I to be some magister's pet? Some bravo's boy? You are to be alive. And if I return? Ned's smile was thin and bleak and gentler than any smile had a right to be. Then return with the winter, he said. Not before. He wanted to say more. John could feel the unsaid like a press of bodies in a small room. He heard himself say nothing. He turned and stepped into the boat. Ghost went last. The wolf hesitated where plank met wood, sniffed the sea's rot and brine as if testing a wind no man could feel. John patted the railing. Come, he said, and the beast flowed aboard, white upon black water. The boat shoved off. Ned Stark did not raise a hand. He stood with both at his sides, fists closed. He diminished as the fog took him, a gray upon gray, until he was the marsh again, and then nothing. The silken gale cut water like silk cuts breath. Duskendale's cliffs dimmed. The night unrolled. In the morning the sea was a dull iron plate and the gulls were the only white. John learned the stooping walk of decks and the sound of rigging that sings in a contrary wind. He learned to knot a line and to coil it, to curse like a Lycini when the knot slid, and to laugh with the ship's cook when Ghost stole a strip of dried fish and bore it to the forecastle to eat triumphantly in the sun. Caro Valentin did not ask questions about the boy whose wolf drew stares from every hand on the gale. He told stories to the crew in a voice made fat by oil and wine. Of the time he had seen the black wall of Volantis rise like an old dragon's spine, all scales and teeth, he said, and of the sea lord whose mistress had a pearl for each tooth and a man killed for the loss of one pearl. When he mentioned Pentos, he did not mention Illyrio. When he mentioned Bravos, he laughed and spat for luck. The Titan, he said, showing his teeth. He roars at those who come with steel and at those who come with silk. But if you carry the right coin, he kissed his fingers. The first time John saw the Titan of Bravos, the fog lay thick and bright like milk, and the great shape stepped out of it so close the air trembled. The statue straddled the entrance to the lagoon with 1 foot on each rocky island, iron and stone both in its bones, and the low boom of a horn inside its chest rolled the sea flat. Its upraised sword caught a pallid sun and hurled it back at the clouds. Ghost stared and did not flinch. Raven dots wheeled about the Titan's head. The silken gale slid beneath and the roar of the sea in the arches went up through John's feet until his bones hummed. Bravos unfolded like a fan. Canals lined by thin houses whose upper stories leaned together until neighbors might shake hands across water. Bridges as delicate as lace and as solid as oaths. Little gardens behind walls spiked with iron. Larger palaces with masks for faces and painted eyes that watched you pass. Men spoke in 100 tongues. Coal-black summer islanders with tattoos like spilled wine walked beside a woman in a sea-green mask and a boy with hair dyed Tyroshi blue. There were scents John knew. Rotting fish, horse, and more he did not. Saffron and sweet pepper, smoke that tasted of cedar, a bomb that smelled of snow and cut him without breaking skin. Caro set them ashore near the Purple Harbor, where shipwrights pounded nails as if the hammers kept time for the whole city. "My masters," he said, "bravos. She will feed you if you learn which hand she eats with." He wagged a finger at Ghost. "Keep him leashed or he will be someone else's supper." Ghost showed his teeth in what the crew had already learned was not a smile. John had dragon gold in his purse and a parting promise from Caro that could be called upon only once. He did not have a name that would hide him. He chose one as he bought a length of leather for Ghost and a cloak that would not show blood or salt and a sleeping place in a narrow loft above a chandler's shop, where the smell of tallow hewed to him like wet wool. He chose John'll at first, the old stark name that sounded like a joke when he thought it in his own mouth. And then, when an innkeeper at the Fisher's Quay squinted at him and said, "Snow, is it? You smell of the north," he said, "No," and made his voice a little more bravosy and said, "No snow in my blood. I am John of the Quay." He learned to make his vowels slant and his consonants sharpen. Tasted false. He swallowed it. He needed work. He could sweep floors. He could make his back bend to carry casks and his hands to gut fish. He could sell his sword. He could sell Ghost's tricks. No, Ghost was not a trick. At a low house with shutters painted the dead green of the shallow canals, he watched a boy fence. The boy was slim and graceful and smug. He wore his curls like laurels. His teacher wore black and moved as if the ground had been making roux. For him all his life. He had a face like a knife and a mustache that whipped when he laughed. "Water dancing," the teacher said when he caught John watching. "You stand like an oak tree. You must stand like a willow." "I stand like a soldier," John said. "Bad habit," the man said, cheerful. "You are not paid enough to stand like a soldier. Come, move. We will see if your feet are smarter than your face." His name was Denio Rindoon. He had danced for a sea lord once. He could put a point exactly where it would prick without drawing blood, and more often where it would draw. John's feet learned to be willow. His wrists learned to turn a blade so it slid across steel instead of biting. His eyes learned the difference between arrogance and confidence. The boy with the curls had the former. Denio had both and hid them so deep that only a misstep brought them to the surface. John trained in the mornings, broke his knuckles in a dockside tavern at midday for a drunk summer islander captain who wanted to see if the white wolf could leap a table. He could. The captain paid double when Ghost did it without touching the pint, and learned bravos in the afternoons. He learned which bridges froze first in winter and which never froze at all. He learned how to stand on a gondola that has a mind to pitch you into the green water. He learned that the house of black and white sat on a quiet canal beneath trees that drooped like prayer, and that a man might go there to die, or to be no one. He did not go. At night he lay with Ghost beside the low window and listened to the city speak. The slap of oars, the shrill laughter of girls who were not girls, the low hum of men gambling in a language without vowels. He dreamed of the godswood and of a tower where the air smelled of blood and blue winter roses. In one dream Ned Stark stood beneath the Titan and said nothing and bled from his mouth until the blood froze and hung in strings. In another Howland Reed's daughter set frogs to swim in a green bowl and each frog leapt to become a man in Lannister armor. They drowned anyway. When a letter came, it bore no seal. The frog was carved into the wax and then smudged, whether by design or by clumsy hands John could not say. There was a strip of birch bark wrapped around folded parchment. He knew the hand that had written on it. Angular, spare, as if the pen could not waste ink. It was not long. It could not be, for a letter that must cross a sea and a city's watchfulness. It told him that Arya was gone from King's Landing and safe, for now. It told him that Sansa was betrothed to the boy king and caged like a bird against winter. It told him that Robb had won a victory in the west and another on the Green Fork, and that the River Lords had named him king in the north. It did not tell him where Ned Stark slept or whether he slept. It did not tell him if Catelyn had forgiven or if she had broken anything in her grief. It did not tell him what he most wanted to hear, not because it was unkind, John thought, but because the words would have been a weight that sank a boat. He folded the letter and put it under his mattress. Ghost lay atop it that night, Bravos kept him. Names came and went. The assassin steps of winter came over the canals and lifted again. John learned to fight with a long knife in his left when his right tired, and learned to punch with a palm when a fist would have broken bone. Denio took his coins and gave him his stubborn patience. "You move as if you have a stone in your boot," Denio said once. "I have a secret under my ribs," John said, and Denio showed his teeth. "Everyone in Bravos," he said, "has a secret under his ribs. You must learn to carry it as if it were a coin you forgot in your pocket." A second letter came in the thaw. The frog was there again, a little misshapen, as if made by a child's hand. It told him of the iron-born on the stony shore, and of a boy with iron in his heart who made himself prince of an empty hall. It told him that Bran and Rickon had been taken from their beds and not found. It told him that a Fry Lord had shown white bridges and red meat and smiling lies. It told him, plainly, without drama, as if stating the weather, that the Night's Watch had taken note of a deserter named Jon Snow, and that his head would be worth a measure of honor to the man who brought it. Jon had been shaving with a bit of polished tin above the chandler's basin. He stood with the razor in his hand while the tallow smoke made a veil. Ghost lifted his head and huffed. The blade trembled. He set it down. He leaned against the frame and listened to the sound of the city until it buried the sound of his blood. "I might go to them," he told Denio later, when the water dancer had him bend his knees until they shook. "Go who?" Denio teased. "The Iron Bank? The black and white? My brothers." "Oh." Denio's eyebrow moved like the blade of a knife. "The ones you fled." "I fled to save my father," John said. "Did you save him?" "No." "Then you fled," Denio said. "Nothing is so heavy it cannot be put down. Your own name can be put down. It will still be there when you need it again." "You speak like a man who sold his name," John said. "I rented it," Denio said. "It was dear. The Sea Lord paid poorly. I bought it back with blood. There is no shame in the renting." John found other work. Men with iron rings through their ears asked if he would guard a small caravan up the Rhône to Selharies and back. He said yes because the city's sighing had begun to feel like someone else's breath in his ear, and because the Rhône ran through a land where no one knew the smell of Winterfell's godswood. Ghost eyed the river with distrust. Its muddy, broad back rolled under a sky so bright it hurt. The trees there were different, taller, with gray-green leaves that flashed like fish. The ruins along the banks were older than the history the Maester had taught, older than iron and older than kings, melted into hills by the wars of men who had ridden fire. Among the caravan hands was a man who called himself Mary's. He had a laugh that came quick and died quicker. He wore a scarf about his face when the wind lifted dust. He watched Jon's sword hand when Jon thought he was not watching. On the second night out from Selharies, he sat beside the fire and shared a bottle of thin wine and said, "The way you stand is Westerosi. The way you hold your shoulders is northern. The way your eyes come back to the wolf is a lover's glance." Jon drank and said nothing. "We could use a good sword," Mary said. "We are the second sons." Jon had heard the name. Sel's words in the east told tales of themselves the way minstrels did, fluting over the lies and waiting the truths. The second sons followed pay. They followed victory. They had fought for Meereen once, then for her enemies. They wore coin like skin. He felt the tug, the coarse promise of a brotherhood without vows, only contracts. He felt the tug and felt it snag on the hook in his ribs. "No," he said, "I follow my own feet. Until they lead you into a ditch," Mary's replied, amused. "We will find you again. The world is not so big as the maps say." When he returned to Bravos, the chandler had rented his loft to a Bravasi girl with a throat like a nightingale and a temper like pepper. The chandler shrugged and spread his hands. "You were gone," he said. "The rent does not vanish." Jon did not press it. He found a different bed, in a room above a smithy that made fishhooks and fine, thin blades that would snap if you used them like a soldier. Ghost disliked the forge's scream. Jon disliked the letters that did not come. He went to the Purple Harbor and back, to the Sea Lord Square with its bronze fountain and back. He passed the house of black and white. He did not go in. 3 men tried to take Ghost from him in an alley off Ragman's harbor. They were desperate and stupid and not hungry enough to be quick. The first died with his hand on Ghost's ear. The second bled from a forearm that opened like a slaughtered pig's. The third ran with a screaming he would hear in his dreams until he finally died of some fever off Mere. John washed his blade in canal water that flamed green in lamplight and thought, "This is what you made of me, Father." On a cold morning that came early, Denio told him, "You have learned enough. Learning the rest would take you to nowhere you want to go." "Where do I want to go?" John asked. Denio's mustache twitched. "Home," he said, "but the road there is not the one you left by. You will need a different path." John went to Caro Valentin. The Pentoshi captain had moored the Silken Gale with her prow too far into mud and was swearing like a Bravosi sailor to men who did not understand the finer points of Valentine obscenity. "Little master," Caro said when he saw John, and chewed a plum pit and spat it overboard. "You have the look of a man who means to ask me for something and to not pay properly for it." "I need to cross," John said. "Not to King's Landing. Not to any port the Lannisters watch." Caro sucked his teeth. "You think you are the only man in the world who wishes to be nowhere the lion's eyes are? Pentos is fat and lazy. Its magisters do not watch the bleachers' vats. Never mind harbors. But you do not want Pentos. No, you want somewhere no one will look. Yes, Lys," Caro said with scorn, and then, "Volantis," with more scorn. "Bravos' daughters wear masks, some made of silk, some of laws. Volantis is a mask that eats your face. Go north, sweet wolf boy. Not to your wall, north across the sea. Lorith. It is a sad place and foggy and hungry. No one looks at Lorith. Or go far east, Karth, if you fancy copper towers and men who think their words are rubies. I have hauled enough fools there to know the look. I have work here," John said. You thought the sea is a road," Caro said, with sudden kindness that looked strange on his face. "It is, but a man on a road must choose a town. You, little master, have not chosen. You have not even bought a map." He laughed and clapped John on the back so hard it drove the air from his lungs. "But I like you. You do not ask ugly questions. If you need a berth, the Gale can give you as far as Pentos and no questions." After that, he spread his hands. "I cannot be everywhere." Ghost nudged John's thigh. The wolf's nose twitched east, toward the morning, toward light that broke the fog like a sword breaking a lock. John thought of Ned standing on the dock with his fists closed. He thought of Rob with a crown of bronze oak leaves and iron, and of Caitlin with her eyes red and her mouth set like a knife, of Arya in shadows and Sansa in a tower cage. He thought of the wall which did not think of him. He thought of a tower of joy and of a promise he had not made but was born inside. "I will be no one's coin," John said. "Ah," Caro murmured. "Then you are already expensive." News traveled slow and fast both, like a river that ran in 2 channels beneath the same sky. Word came that Stannis Baratheon had declared and taken the Flaming Heart for his banner, and had built a fire his brother's widow would have called a heresy. Word came that Renly's splendid sword had broken, and that he had knelt to death in a black tent pierced by no blade any man saw. Word came that the young wolf was unbeaten on the field and bound by old oaths the river lords remembered when their wine cups were full. Word came in a rush that turned the keys silent, that the lion had welcomed guests at a wedding and fed them knives. After the red wedding, the whole world seemed to talk more softly for a time, as if corners were dangerous. John took the letter with the frog and the birch bark to the forge and held it over the coals until the writing ran like tears. He stood and watched it turn black. Ghost put his head under John's hand and bore his weight when his knees would have given. He did not go west. He did not throw himself into the narrow sea and let the waves carry him like a log to a shore that stank of blood and iron. He stayed where the fog lay on the canals like grief. In that grief, a man in a brown robe came to him as he leaned on a bridge low and green with moss. The man's face was ordinary, unremarkable as a stone stepped over 1,000 times. He had a coin in his fingers that he turned and turned so that it flashed and vanished and flashed again. "You are wearing your name like a shirt turned inside out," the man said. His voice could have been Bravosi, could have been Myrish. It was soft as new snow. "I am wearing a name," John said. "It is enough. For some men," the man said. He showed John the coin. It was a soft circle, black and iron, pitted as if it had been bitten. "Vala Morgulis," he said, as if it were a greeting, not a judgment. John had heard the words in taverns and on docks. All men must die. Denio had once shrugged them off with a laugh. Then all women must live, he had said, and the girls had clapped their hands and thrown their heads back like seals. "Valadohiris," John said slowly, tasting the response. "All men must serve." The man smiled, faint as fog. "Not all," he said, "but many, and even those who do not serve must choose whom to defy. You have chosen to defy the sea. I have chosen to live," John said, and Ghost's ears twitched as if to say that was something different. The man glanced at the wolf with interest that did not flare. "A white shadow," he said, amused. "You will not be no one with that one at your heel."
"No."
"Good," the man said, and his coin disappeared. "It is a foolish thing to be no one, even for a while." He walked away. He did not look back. John stood on the bridge until the mist took him. He took work with a merchant who traded in pepper from the Jade Sea and had wives in 3 cities and a mistress who had taught him to count. He guarded bales and barrels and took a cut when the numbers came up, as they always did. He spared a girl whose brother had tried to cut his throat because there was a moment in her eyes that looked like Arya's, and then hated himself for the softness that had no place where knives were currency. He learned to speak enough Pentoshi to bargain and enough Tyroshi to be cheated in prettier words. He did not become hard. He became quiet. Another letter came with no frog. He burned it without opening it. He did not know if that was courage or cowardice. He did not know if the things he had named were different any longer. He dreamed of wolves on a big white plain, and of a gate of ice that opened on black. He dreamed of a woman with hair like winter's night and a crown that burned without heat, and of a man whose eyes were blue as broken glass, a man he knew and did not know. He woke with his heart hammering and the smell of frost in his nose and the sound of the sea in his ears. Not Bravos' soft lap against walls, but a roar under a statue's feet. In the morning he went to Caro Valentin. "Mireen," Caro said, and made a face as if the word tasted bad. "The slavers have trouble. A silver prince and a dragon queen make trouble wherever they go." "Dragons," John said, and the old boyhood returned for one heartbeat. The page heat, the fever that takes a boy when he first hears how a king was meant to be. Caro huffed. "I have seen one from a distance and felt my hair curl, and that was enough. 3, they say. One big, not yet big enough to eat a ship. Maybe it will soon. I do not argue with a dragon. I do not love a slaver. But gold is gold, little master. Men flock, the wind blown, the storm crows, the second sons. Bah!" He spat. "Everyone sells the same sword, different songs." "Would you take me there?" John asked. "For coin." "I would," Caro said. "Karth, Mireen, Yunkai, names on the same road. But you ask me for a sword, not a berth. Will you sell it?" John looked at Ghost. The wolf cocked his head and sneezed. "I will not sell it to a slaver," John said. Caro's grin was sudden sunlight. "Then you will be hungry," he said. "But you will live with a taste in your mouth you can still swallow. Good. You are the wrong sort of poor man. I like you." He did not go east. He trained, he worked, he waited, he learned. He grew a beard and sheared it and grew it again and found that his face changed when he changed it. He learned to say no in 5 tongues. He bled and healed and learned where the city hid its best doctors and its worst debts. He did not become Bravosi. He remained a man who walked as if the ground were rock under thin moss. When winter came full to Bravos, the canals glazed and the poor burned their furniture. Men fell through ice into green water and were pulled out with hooks or not pulled out at all. The Titan's roar sounded different in cold, a deeper note that John felt in his chest like sorrow. In the forge above which he slept, the smith wrapped a scarf around his mouth and hammered with the rage of a man who knows hammering won't warm him. Ghost hunted along the quays and came back with whiskers rimed with frost and eyes like embers. It was in that hard weather that a sail came into the purple harbor under a flag of no city John knew. It was a rough cloth, gray as winter, with a frog stitched crudely in green. The captain who found John in the alley of eel skins had a Westerosi look under his beard and a way with his hands that made John's blood know him before his name did. "Mira Reed is with me," the man said quietly, "and the Lord of Greywater Watch waits where no one can wait. He bid me bring you a letter. He bid me bring you home if I could." John felt himself grow still. He took the parchment. He did not break the seal. He held it until the cold went into his bones, and then all at once he could not feel it at all. "Read it," the man said. He sounded sad. "It is a paper, not a curse." John broke the seal. The birch bark was there again. The words were Ned's. Robb was dead. Caitlin. The phrase had sung. The Boltons had smiled with knife teeth. Winterfell stones had been warmed with the bodies of wolves and men. There was no valiance in the telling because valiance would have cheapened what was ruined. There was only that steady hand. There was a line at the end, written more slowly, as if the pen had been mired in reeds. "If you come, you will die. If you do not come, you will live. If you live, you may help." John stood for a long time with the paper in his hand, and in that standing he was a boy in Winterfell again and a man at the wall and a sellsword not yet sold, all at once. He thought of the direwolves, Summer, Grey Wind, Lady, Shaggy Dog, and of the names of men like stones thrown into a river to see the splash. He thought of honor and of justice and of a woman with her pale hands bound and her throat opened by a man with a small mouth. He walked through Bravos with the letter folded and unfolded in his fist until the edges frayed. He crossed bridges without looking down. He passed the house of black and white and did not go in. He stood beneath the shadow of the Titan and let the roar fill his head until there was no other sound. He went to Denio Rendoon and stood on thin ice and said, "How do you carry a secret that weighs more than iron?" Denio turned his face to the sky as if listening for snow. "You carry it with someone else," he said, "or you let it break you. The second way is more poetic." He went to Caro Valentin, and the Pentoshi captain took his measure as if he were weighing spice. "Westeros," Caro said with distaste. "No good wind blows that way." "If I ask you to carry me," John said, "I will pay you what I have. You may not want it." Caro clicked his tongue. "I will. Take your gold, your silver, your pepper, your song. But a wolf," he tilted his head. "A wolf is worth more than gold if you know to whom to sell it." "I do not." "Then I will keep him," John said, and Ghost's tail thumped once like a heartbeat. Caro sighed, a long breath that steamed. "A fool's voyage," he said, "which are the only ones worth the telling." "When?" "At the last thaw," John said, and the words surprised him with their confidence. "After the ice has broken, before the river gets ideas." Caro laughed. "The river always has ideas," he said, "but very well. I will show the gale how to love you again. And when you come back, if you come back, you will owe me a cask of the North's best spirits and a story that makes me jealous." John bowed the way Denio had taught him. "I will bring you something better," he said. "Winter." He went to the forge and gave the smith 2 dragons for a blade with a narrow waist and a temper that would not shatter when it tasted ice. He went to Denio and gave him his thanks and his payment and a promise to practice until his feet forgot to be oak. He went to a certain quiet canal at dusk and watched a brown-robed man perform a kindness for a woman who had come to the doors to die. He went nowhere that was not already in his blood. He wrote one more letter and sealed it with nothing and gave it to the captain with the frog. Said simply, "I am coming. Hide the fire until I do." Before he left, he went to the weirwood that was not a weirwood. In Bravos they did not grow, but there was a small court behind a faded house where a pale-leaf tree had been trained to a lattice and painted with thin veins of red, a mockery and a yearning. John stood beneath it and spoke to leaves that understood at least the shape of prayer. He did not ask the old gods for victory. He asked them to make his heart as steady as his father's hand. On the day the silken gale cast off her lines, the fog lay high and thin for once. The Titan's roar was clearer. Ghost stood at the prow and watched the city recede, his ears forward, his balance perfect. John stood behind him with one hand on his fur, and the wind blew cold and smelled of brine and iron and old wars. Far to the east, a girl with silver hair sat on a carved bench and held out a hand to a creature that hummed like a hearth. Far to the north, in a ruined hall, a boy with a dream staring through him looked at a pool under red leaves and saw a boat pass beneath something vast. Farther still, beyond both, things moved that knew only winter. Bravos made its own weather. The world did not care. John did. He felt the weight of his secret settle not as a stone, not as a coin, but as a blade he had been carrying all along without knowing it. Fit his hand. He looked at the place where sea met sky, a narrow seam like a promise sewn into the world, and he did not look back.